The Montana sky bled orange, and I was running out of options. My pickup truck coughed its last breath on a dirt road, and the help wanted ad for a ranch hand was the only lifeline in my pocket. What did I know about cattle? Nothing but desperation makes a man bold. I'm Ethan Cole, 24, with a duffel bag and a past I'd rather bury. Fresh out of a dead-end job in Boise, I answered the ad for Hollow Creek Ranch, figuring manual labor might keep my demons at bay. The ranch sprawled across 1,000 acres, a sea of grass and grit under a sky that felt too big. I arrived at dusk, boots crunching on gravel, and met Caleb Harper, the foreman. He was all sharp-edged stall, broad-shouldered, with piercing blue eyes that sized me up like I was livestock. "You ever work a ranch?" he asked, voice low and rough. I shook my head, and he smirked. "You'll learn fast or leave faster." What made Caleb's gaze linger a little too long? Why did my pulse quicken when he handed me the reins of a horse named Dusty? I pushed the thoughts down, chalking it up to nerves. The ranch was a world of its own, cowboys shouting, horses snorting, and the constant hum of hard work. I was the new guy, the city kid who didn't know a heifer from a steer. The others, grizzled men with calloused hands, gave me sideways looks but kept their distance. Caleb, though, was different. He was everywhere, showing me how to mend a fence, barking orders, or watching me fumble with a lasso. His presence was a weight, both unsettling and magnetic. By the end of the first week, my hands were blistered, and my pride was bruised. Caleb caught me struggling with a bale of hay one evening, sweat soaking my shirt. "You're not quitting, are you, Cole?" he said, leaning against a barn post. His tone was teasing, but his eyes held something else, something that made my throat tighten. I mumbled something about sticking it out, and he nodded, tossing me a water canteen. "Good. We need men with grit." The way he said men felt personal, like a challenge I didn't yet understand. What does it mean to prove yourself in a place that demands everything? I wasn't just learning to rope or ride. I was learning Caleb. His gruff commands hid a quiet patience, and his rare smiles felt like a reward. One night, after a long day herding cattle, he offered me a beer by the campfire. The others had turned in, leaving us alone under a blanket of stars. "You're not half bad for a city boy," he said, his voice softer than usual. I laughed, but my heart was pounding. Why did his words feel like they carried more weight than they should? The ranch wasn't just work, it was a crucible. I'd come here to escape, but Caleb's presence was stirring something I'd spent years ignoring. I'd grown up in a small town where being different wasn't an option. My father's voice still echoed in my head, "Be a man, Ethan." But what kind of man was I becoming here, under Caleb's watchful eyes? The tension between us was growing, unspoken but undeniable, like a storm gathering on the horizon. As the weeks passed, I found my rhythm. I could saddle a horse without falling, and the other hand started nodding at me instead of sneering. But Caleb was the real mystery. He'd linger after giving me tasks, his hand brushing mine when he passed me tools. Was I imagining it? Or was there something he wasn't saying? One afternoon, while we repaired a fence under the blazing sun, he pulled off his shirt, revealing a map of scars across his back. "Rough life," he said, catching my stare. I wanted to ask, but the word stuck. What scars was he hiding that weren't on his skin? That night, as the ranch settled into silence, Caleb found me by the stables. "You're doing all right, Ethan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the leather and sweat on him. "Stick around, and I'll show you what this place is really about." His words were an offer, a door cracking open. But to what? My heart raced, torn between fear and a longing I couldn't name. What happens when you step through a door you can't close? The days blurred into a rhythm of sweat and dust. But Caleb's words lingered like a brand. What did he mean by what this place is really about? I couldn't shake the way his eyes held mine, steady and searching, as if he saw something in me I hadn't dared to face. Work on the ranch was relentless. Dawn to dusk, we moved cattle, repaired fences, and hauled feed. My body ached, but it was the ache of purpose, something I'd never felt in Boise. The other hands guys like Tom and Jesse started warming to me, sharing their coffee or ribbing me about my clumsy roping. But Caleb was the one I watched. He moved with a quiet authority, commanding respect without raising his voice. Yet there was a loneliness to him, a shadow that clung even in the midday sun. What had carved that shadow into a man so young? One morning, while we rode out to check the herd, Caleb pulled his horse alongside mine. "You ever think about what you're running from, Ethan?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The question hit like a punch. How did he know I was running? I muttered something about needing a change, but he just nodded, like he'd heard the lie and let it slide. His silence was louder than words, and it left me wondering, what was he running from? The ranch wasn't just a place. It was a mirror. Every task forced me to confront my limits, my fears. I'd spent years dodging who I was, burying feelings that didn't fit the mold of the man my father wanted. But here, under the vast Montana sky, those feelings were clawing their way out. Caleb's presence didn't help. Every glance, every accidental touch, felt like a spark on dry grass. Was I reading too much into it? Or was he feeling it too? One evening, after a brutal day branding calves, Caleb asked me to help him in the barn. The air was thick with the scent of hay and leather. We worked in silence, stacking bales, until he stopped and looked at me. "You're not like the others, Ethan," he said, his voice low. "You've got something real." My breath caught. What did he see in me that I couldn't? Before I could respond, he turned away, leaving me with a racing heart and a question I was too scared to ask. The tension between us was a tightrope, and I was losing my balance. The other hand started noticing. Jesse caught me staring at Caleb one day and raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Small-town instincts die hard, and I knew what they'd think if they suspected anything. I'd seen it back home, whispers, judgment, fists. But Caleb was different. He didn't seem to care what anyone thought. Why was he so fearless? Or was he just better at hiding his fear? One night, a storm rolled in, thunder shaking the bunkhouse. I couldn't sleep, so I slipped out to the porch, letting the rain cool my skin. Caleb was there, leaning against a post, his silhouette sharp against the lightning. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, offering me a cigarette. I took it, though I didn't smoke, just to feel the brush of his fingers. We stood there, watching the storm, and he started talking about growing up in a town that didn't want him, about leaving home at 17. "You ever feel like you don't belong anywhere?" he asked. I nodded, my throat tight. What would he say if I told him the truth? The next day, Caleb took me to a remote corner of the ranch to fix a broken gate. We worked side by side, the silence heavy. When we finished, he sat on the grass, patting the ground beside him. I hesitated, then sat, our shoulders almost touching. "This place," he said, "it's where I found myself. You could too." His words felt like a confession. But of what? My heart was a drumbeat, loud and unsteady. What did it mean to find yourself in a place like this? The ranch was changing me, but Caleb was rewriting me. His words by the gate, "You could find yourself," echoed in my head, daring me to face what I'd buried. But what happens when the truth you find could burn everything down? Work kept us busy, but the moments between tasks were where the real weight settled. Caleb's glances grew bolder, his touches less accidental. A hand on my back to steady me, a lingering look when he thought I wasn't watching. I was drowning in it, torn between wanting to run and wanting to lean in. What did it mean to want someone so fiercely in a world that didn't forgive it? One afternoon, we rode out to check a fence line near the river. The sun was high, the air humming with insects. Caleb dismounted and waded into the shallow water, splashing his face. "Come on," "City boy," he called, grinning. I followed, laughing despite myself, and we ended up soaked, wrestling in the current. For a moment, it was just us, no ranch, no rules, no past. His hand gripped my arm, and our laughter faded. His eyes locked on mine, and I saw it, desire, raw and unguarded. What would happen if I didn't look away? I did, though. Fear won, and I pulled back, muttering about getting back to work. Caleb's face tightened, but he didn't push. That night, I lay awake, replaying the moment. Why was I so scared? I'd spent my life running from these feelings I'd been taught were wrong. A father who'd called them sin. But Caleb wasn't running. He was standing still, waiting for me to catch up. The ranch wasn't all open skies and camaraderie. Tension simmered among the hands. Tom, the oldest, started watching me and Caleb too closely, his jaw tight when we worked together. "City boys getting cozy with the boss," he muttered once, loud enough for me to hear. The word stung, but Caleb just laughed it off. "Let him talk," he said later, when we were alone. "They don't know me." But did I? What was he risking by letting me in? One evening, Caleb asked me to join him for a ride at dusk. We ended up at a hill overlooking the ranch, the sky a bruise of purple and gold. He spread a blanket and pulled out a flask, passing it to me. "To surviving," he said, his voice soft. We drank, the whiskey burning, and he told me about his scarce fights, accidents, a father who didn't hold back. "I left because I had to be me," he said. "Not what they wanted." I wanted to tell him I understood, that I'd left too, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I asked, "What do you want now?" He looked at me, his eyes steady. "Something real." What did real mean in a place like this? The next day, trouble brewed. Tom caught us laughing together in the barn, and his sneer was venomous. "You two think you're slick," he said, spitting on the ground. Caleb stepped forward, his voice cold. "Mind your business, Tom." The older man backed off, but the air was thick with warning. I felt exposed, like a secret I hadn't admitted was already out. How long could we keep this dance up before someone got hurt? That night, Caleb found me by the stables again. "Don't let them get to you," he said, his hand brushing mine. "They don't matter." But they did. The world did. I wanted to ask him how he lived so unafraid. But instead, I just stood there, my hand tingling where he'd touched it. What happens when you want something you've been taught to hate? The ranch was a pressure cooker, and I was starting to crack. Caleb's touch, his words, his fearless way of existing, they were pulling me apart. But what happens when you let yourself want what you've always feared? Tom's hostility grew louder. Whispers spread among the hands, glances turning sharp. Caleb didn't flinch, but I felt the weight of every stare. I'd seen what happened to guys like me back home, shunned, beaten, driven out. The ranch was supposed to be my fresh start, but it was becoming a battlefield. Why did Caleb seem so unshaken? What gave him that kind of strength? One morning, we were tasked with moving a herd across the river. It was grueling, the cattle stubborn and the water high. Caleb and I worked together, our horses side by side, shouting over the chaos. When a calf got stuck in the mud, I jumped in to free it, slipping in the process. Caleb was there in an instant, pulling me up, his hand strong on my arms. "You good?" he asked, his face close to mine. I nodded, but Tom was watching, his eyes narrow. Later, he cornered me by the tack room. "You and Harper better watch yourselves," he said, his voice low. "This ain't that kind of place." My stomach churned. What did he know? That evening, Caleb took me to the hill again. The air was cool, the stars sharp. He didn't bring the flask this time. Instead, he sat close, our knees touching. "Tom's got a problem," he said, "but he's not your fight." I wanted to believe him, but the fear was real. What if he's right? I asked, my voice barely audible. What if the Seuss is wrong? Caleb's jaw tightened. Nothing's wrong if it's true, he said. And this? He touched my hand. Deliberate and unapologetic. This feels true. My heart stopped. What does it mean to choose truth over safety? The next day, the ranch owner, Mr. Grayson, called a meeting. He was a stern man, all business, and he'd heard the rumors. I run a clean operation, he said, his eyes scanning us. No distractions, no trouble. His gaze lingered on me, and I felt like I was shrinking. Caleb stood tall, his face unreadable. Did he know how much was at stake? After the meeting, he pulled me aside. Grayson's old school, he said, but he's fair. Don't let him scare you. Easy for him to say, who wasn't the one feeling like an outsider. That night, everything changed. Caleb asked me to meet him by the old oak tree near the creek, far from the bunkhouse. When I got there, he was waiting, his hat off, his hair catching the moonlight. I'm done hiding. Ethan, he said, I want you to know who I am. Before I could respond, he stepped closer, his hand cupping my face. And then he kissed me. It was fierce, desperate, like he'd been holding it back for years. I froze, then melted, kissing him back with everything I'd buried. What happens when you finally let go? But the world doesn't stop for a kiss. Footsteps crunched behind us, and we broke apart. Tom stood there, his face twisted with disgust. I knew it. He spat. You're done here. He turned and walked away, and my heart sank. Caleb grabbed my arm. We'll figure this out, he said, but his voice shook. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. What had we just unleashed? Tom's words were a guillotine, and the blade was falling. Caleb's hand was still on my arm, but the world felt like it was closing in. What do you do when the truth you've embraced becomes a weapon? The next morning, the ranch was a powder keg. Tom had talked, and the hands were buzzing. Some avoided me. Others glared. Caleb acted like nothing had changed, barking orders as usual, but I saw the strain in his jaw. I wanted to run, to pack my bag and disappear, but his steady presence kept me rooted. Why was he still fighting when everything was at risk? Mr. Grayson called us to his office at noon. Tom was there, arms crossed, a smirk on his face. I don't tolerate this, Grayson said, his voice cold. This is a ranch, not a soap opera. He looked at Caleb, then me. You've got one day to pack. My heart stopped, but Caleb stepped forward. Fire me if you want, he said, but Ethan stays. He's a good hand, and you know it. Grayson's eyes narrowed. You're both replaceable. But Caleb didn't back down. Then replace me. I've been here 5 years. You know what I'm worth. What kind of man risks everything for someone he barely knows? The standoff ended with Grayson giving us a week to sort ourselves out. But the damage was done. The hands shunned us, and Tom's taunts grew bolder. That night, Caleb found me by the creek, my bag half-packed. You're not leaving, he said, his voice fierce. Not because of them. I wanted to scream that I was scared, that I wasn't as brave as him. Instead, I asked, why me? He smiled, soft and sad. Because you're the first person who makes me feel like I'm enough. My chest ached. What does it mean to be enough for someone else? We decided to fight, not with fists, but with truth. Caleb told the hands his story, how he'd lost his family for being who he was, how the ranch had been his refuge. Some listened, others walked away. But Jesse, the quiet one, stepped up. I don't care who you love, he said. You're a good foreman. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Could a place like this ever change? The week ended with Grayson calling us back. He'd heard the hands talking, seen the work we'd done. I don't understand you, he said to Caleb, but you're the best foreman I've got. Stay? Both of you. It wasn't acceptance, but it was a chance. Tom quit the next day, and the ranch felt lighter. like it could breathe again. What happens when you stand your ground? Caleb and I stayed. The ranch didn't become a paradise. There were still whispers, still doubts, but we carved out a space for ourselves. We worked hard, loved quietly, and found moments under the stars to be us. I'd come to Hollow Creek to escape, but I found something better, a home, a truth, a man who saw me. The Cowboy Foreman's offer that night is heart. His courage changed my life forever. What does it mean to live as your true self? For me, it meant Caleb, the ranch, and a future I never dared to dream.